page 33, Winifred Aldrich. She calls this a gored skirt. I would usually refer to this as a panelled skirt. It's just the term that I use, but good to know what that gore is, this word that you use for panels as well. So I think of a panel as a long straight bit, okay? Lines going kind of down like that, and that's what a gored is. I don't have a garment that's exactly like that one, but for example, this skirt does have lines there, which is creating panels across the skirt, okay? So it's got two sort of smaller panels at the side and one larger one in the middle. That's how I would describe it. So like that, when we're doing our pattern pieces at the end, we're going to have several front pieces. We're not just going to have a front and a back. So on this, we can have a little overview. We can see our flat drawings or our working drawings there. We can see front and back straight away. We can take a minute to observe the working drawing. So in this case, we're like the pattern drafter, and we've been given the assignment to draft this pattern for this skirt. And you want to take a minute looking at all of the things that you're to do. And you can see in the back is where the opening is and where the zip is. And other than that, the back and the front look fairly similar. We can look down here, we can see our first construction where she has the two blocks like I have them here, hip to hip, lined up. And you can see all the lines that are going on and all of this. Then you can see the next step where everything is taken into little panels. And this skirt is flared, so there's flare at the bottom. It's not a straight skirt. So we're going to look at this way that you can put flare on. So before we were looking at the technique of drawing a slash line or a cutting line and then cutting it up, closing over the dart and spreading out, or cutting up the line and just spreading out. So that's your kind of slash and spread or your cut and spread method. Another way you can add flare is onto any seam. So anywhere you have a seam, you can add some flare onto it. And in this case, we're going to have lots of seams. We're going to add a little bit to each so it goes nicely. Again, it's the same concept with the flare, that the flare is added, evenly across so that you get a nice three-dimensional effect. Her instructions trace around the straight skirt block required. So again, we can always change the block that we start from. And we rub out the waist darts, which is what she says. I'm going to just talk through this a little bit and then explain. Divide the front and back skirt into 6 equal sections on the hip line. Square up and down. Add 1 centimetre to the waistline at the front and the back side. Draw a dotted line approximately 14 centimetres below the waistline. So, and then for the back and front, she says increase the dart allowance by 1 centimetre. Divide the increased dart allowance into 2 darts. Place them on the gored lines. Extend the darts to the dotted line. And trace each gored section. Okay, so there's a lot of steps to this, and I want to explain some theory as we go. So the darts, she's saying straight away that we rub them out. We trace around and we rub them out. Now usually I don't rub out the darts, and usually even on your drafts I don't like you to, because I like you to kind of draw them in and show me that you're moving them. But actually I think in this one we kind of can, because it just gets very messy if you don't rub them out. But what I want to explain is these darts are like, the concept is the shaping or the fitting. And the idea is, like, if I rub them out, that's fine, as long as I know in my head I have just rubbed out whatever it is, 2 centimetres and 2. So I have 4 centimetres of fitting that I need to get back onto this waist, And it's the same on the front. Well, it's different on the front in that it's only 2 centimetres, but same concept. If I remove this, I have to remember, oh, I need to put the fitting back on. All right, so your waist line is a particular measurement, and in this case, this block will be 1/4 of the waistline, and this one will be 1/4 of the waistline. We need to kind of remember that, plus a little bit of ease, because there's ease on, there's 1 centimetre ease gone around the whole skirt, so there'll be 0.25 centimetres of ease on each one. So it's all fine to erase them as long as we know for sure that we're not going to forget to put the darts back on. We might erase them because we want to put them on in very different places and different amounts or whatever. So the dart itself is a representation of a shaping that we need to put back on. So it's wider at the top and it fizzles out to where there's pretty much no shaping around here. There is a little bit of room to move around the length of the darts. You can see there are 3 different lengths on this block, on these Winifred Aldrich blocks. Actually, some of her blocks have changed a bit in the newer editions. They're slightly different lengths. So I think her front dart was always a bit short, and I think in the newer edition she's lengthened it. So there is room to move with these a bit. But the reason this one's shorter is because the tummy comes out kind of sooner, so you need to go narrow at the waist, but the physical body will come out, you know, sooner here, like into a more of a bump for the belly. But like the bum doesn't come out till lower, so you kind of need more shaping there along the back, and then it's lower down that you get a bigger shape here. So that's why they're different. And you know, if you have a very tailored skirt, this skirt is going to be flared like that, evenly, and so it's not super fitted at the top. It's still relatively fitted, but you know, it's smooth and it's going out. And we're going to need to do that in a regular way. And so I think her suggestion of rubbing out the darts in this one case, is actually probably good. Okay, so it's probably the one and only time I get you to do this, but we're going to rub out the darts there. Okay, so as I was talking about the last time, there's 2 options for dividing. If we're trying to divide, we can either divide at the hip or the waist. We can divide evenly. In this case, we really want it to look very even. And so we are going to divide it at the hip. Okay, because it won't look even if we divide it at the waist. This will be bigger. We're going to divide it at the hip, and we're going to organize the waist so that it is also even. So divide the front and back skirts into 6 equal sections along the hip line. Now I think if we do that, we're going to end up moving the side seam, which is a little annoying. What I tend to say is divide your back into 3 sections and divide your front into 3 sections. They will be slightly different, but it's not, you know, you're not going to notice because it comes down to millimeters. So we just have a slight adjustment on that instruction that she gave. So we're going to go along to the hip line here and say the back is 25 there across for me in full scale, and then I divide that by 3 and I get 8.3, and so I'm going to mark in. So now my back is divided evenly and my front is divided evenly. There was just slight difference in millimeters. So the next thing she says is to add 1 centimeter to the waistline at the front and 1 at the back. So I'm going to write it up here. I've lost 2, there was 2 centimeter darts, so I'm going to say there was 4 centimeter shaping that I've lost, but now she's also added 1 extra there. So we're going to add 1 extra. So now all of a sudden I've got to get 5 back off to match the waist measurement to be back at my size. So I'm just keeping track of it by putting it up there. So I'm adding 1 centimeter and I'm just blending that into the side seam there. That's what you can see in red. And this is very relevant. This kind of stuff is also very relevant to menswear. We do this a lot actually in men's as well. So these concepts are, you know, very relevant to men's or women's wear. measurements of, oh, I don't know what they were, those were 7.9. So mine was 7.9 for this full scale. Was 8.3. So the shaping here was 2 centimeters plus the 1, which is 3. So then the next thing she says is draw a line 14 centimeters down. That is just a dotted line. And remember, our waistline is slightly angled. That is correct. The slight angle on the waistline will transfer into a three-dimensional shape that looks straight at the waist. So on 2 dimensions it's angled. So we measure down and we will get a dotted line and it will be angled. So 14 in full scale.
And it's just going to help us know where to end.
Okay, and so then, so now we've completed all the instructions on this section. So that's kind of our main sort of setup. And now we're going to deal with our shaping and our waistline and figure out how to get this back so that it's even up here and we've taken away the amount of shaping that we need. Increase the dart allowance by 1 centimeter. So she's calling it dart allowance. I'm calling it shaping, but so obviously that's her term for it. So she's saying increase it by 1, which is what I've already done there for us. And then she says divide the increased dart allowance into 2 darts placed on the gore lines. So she's calling these the gore lines. Extend the darts to the dotted line. So we've created this dotted line as to where to extend them to. I mean, we could have just measured down 14, but it just kind of gives you a sense that, you know, this whole thing, it's coming in until that point and then it will go straight down. And then actually it will go out because we'll add flare. We're going to add the extra, then we're going to divide that by 2 because we want to put half on this gore line and half on that line. And the same here, we're going to divide it by 2. So we end up with 3 divided in half is 1.5, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to put 1.5, that's full scale, on each line there. Now you need to center that, so if I have 1.5 on that, I'm coming out 0.75 on each side. Then I'm coming down all the way to that point. That's the apex of the dart. So 1.5 in total, because you want the dart sitting centered on that line. Now 5 divided by 2 is a different amount, so there'll be a different amount on the back. So 2.5 is what I'm putting on to each of these darts. So you can see what happens in the next one. She's going to divide this out into all different sections. And this is one of the areas where it can be really nice to use your highlighter to color code the different sections. Because what we're going to do is we're going to now take each section. There'll be 3 on the front and 3 on the back. We're going to take them, we're going to spread them out. We're going to trace each section off and we're going to spread it out because we need to add some flair to each section. So we need to add flair to the bottom of these. So we need to have space so we can spread it out and add our flair. But notice on all of these there's straighter grains on each piece because once we separate these out. There's no grain line in there, so we need to get our grain lines on here first. So as we trace off, we trace the whole piece, we trace our grain line on it, then we flare it, and that's construction step 2. We need to then trace off final pieces without any extra construction lines on it. And the thing that is most confusing is which line do you go on up here? Because I think most people get this bit right, but it's like, which line do I go on? So what I'd say to you is, try and think about what happens on the body. So the body is narrower at the waist, so you go on the inside line, and then it goes wider. So then you're on your middle section and you go, okay, well, which one of these lines am I tracing? Well, the body goes narrower at the waist, so it should be the narrowest one we're going in there. Another thing you can do sometimes helps people visually is to shade out the dart. So it's like you realize that doesn't exist. That's like empty space, or that's like something else. Sometimes that helps all of a sudden visually. They go, oh yeah, now I'm going on this side of the dart for that one. You know? If you don't have highlighters, the other system you can use is symbols. So you can go around with little circles here. And then the next one you can do X's. And the next one you can do triangles, and you'll see that sometimes the line has a couple of symbols, so it's been traced off a couple of times. And on this one we've got 2 lines there. We've got the extra one we added, but that is the one that we now are using. Okay, so in some ways the techniques that we've done here haven't been super hard. They've been maybe a bit tedious. We needed to follow instructions and just be sure a little bit that our arithmetic is correct and everything. There hasn't been anything too conceptually difficult. But what happens is on this one, the tracing is quite difficult. You know, it's quite tedious. You got to trace, 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 trace. You got to be sure you're on the correct line. You got to do it again repeatedly. Is my grain line there? Is, you know, are my notches there? All that. So that's what the work is in this one. It's kind of a large amount of tracing. And the things that we need to do for when we trace is create our grain lines, and we also need to create notches. I'm going to do the notches at the next step. So the grain lines I'm going to do straight away. So add a grain line into each. You can do whatever measurement you want, but it just needs to be somewhere in the center of this, and it needs to be a parallel line to the center front. So I'm going to draw that in. Again, now I've drawn them right in the middle, so I could do it differently on this one. So I'm going to come in at 3 and 3 here. I'm going to keep my line over to the side, which is actually slightly better because you're going to have to label, and if your line is always in the middle of every panel, it's hard to fit your labeling in. So I do draw an S on mine. Once you have the arrows on each, it's fine. I like them to be quite long. Probably in the book hers are much shorter. So I'm now going to take a piece of paper and I'm going to trace all of these, but I'm going to trace this one and I'm going to then scoot my paper over because I'm going to need to add flare on the bottom. So I need these trace-offs to be spaced out so that I can add the flare. So I'm going to trace this one, move my paper over, trace that one. Now they can get very abstracted and we don't know which is the front and the back and which is the middle one. They all start to look very similar. If you look at that at a glance, they're all very similar. So what you want to do is mark them, label them. So you can see she has them labeled there, back, middle back and side back. So I could name them that way, or sometimes I just put the initials down. But I call that the center back. She just calls it back, middle and side. It might be better because the middle is the middle of these, so center might kind of confuse, but to me I always put center back because that's a center back panel. This is, say, the middle back, and this is the side back. And then this is the side front, the middle front, and the center front. And when I trace off, I'm still not finished. It's going to be the construction part 2. I'm going to add all my flare, I'm going to add all my notches, and then I'm going to do the final trace off. Adding 3 centimeters flare on each one. So essentially we're still constructing, so this isn't a pattern piece yet. Okay, so you can see now, this is my center front panel, my middle front, and my side front. The important thing is to trace the grain line.
Is that a second construction or is it pattern?
Yeah, so this is our second construction, okay? I'm just going to demonstrate tracing over this. So essentially it's not a pattern piece if it has construction lines on it. So these are still construction lines, these lines here, you know?
Okay.
So if we could just put seam allowance around that and hem allowance, it's, you know. So again, in the classroom we're doing best practice and we're, do you know what I mean, going to show that we would trace that off again. So I'll trace off a couple of these with the seam allowance just to give you an example, but I probably won't trace every single one, just trace a couple of them. So again, it's a practice of knowing what to trace and what not to trace. So the outer line, the outer edge, and understanding that those other lines that are there are only there for us to construct from. They come from the block, or from our first adaptations, and we've constructed from them, but we no longer need them. So you have to find a little spot to put your labeling on. So again, my name, then which skirt it is. So this is the Gored skirt. I'm calling this the CF panel, the center front panel, and we're cutting 2. So on this, we're just cutting 2 of everything. So it's simple on the cutting instructions. And then yes, because there's a flare, we do need to fold back up and trace through, and there'll be a little fishtail. It might only be slight, but again, this is the practice for you guys to get into all your best practices and to try and, the more you do it, the more you kind of hopefully remember in the future to do it. Also, a reminder to extend all your lines, you know. It's another thing you're doing on your pattern pieces always.